It was night, and the wind was cold and silent, and the stars were shining above the lonely human. Outpost on planet LX-17, John sat alone in his small cabin made of metal walls and silent machines, and he listened to the soft hum of the power unit. His dog Rusty was sleeping near the door with one ear up and one eye half open. Like always, John was not a soldier now, and not a fighter. Now just a man who had left the war and wanted peace and silence in the far side of space. But peace is not something that always stays where you want it to stay, and silence can break without warning. A soft knock echoed on the metal door, once, then twice, then silence again. John froze, and Rusty growled a low sound like thunder in a bottle. No one ever knocked here. This was a forgotten place where only wind and dust were supposed to visit. Knock came again, softer this time, like fingers shaking from cold or fear. John picked up his old plasma tool, not to attack, but just to hold something solid. He opened the door slowly and carefully, and what he saw made him take one step back without even knowing it. She stood there under the moonlight, tall and strange and almost beautiful in a wild way. Her skin was pale blue and marked with faint glowing lines that looked like rivers of light. Her armor was broken and dirty, and her eyes were wide and shining with pain and fear and something deeper. She did not fall, but she almost did, and she looked straight into his eyes and spoke, "Please let me in. My body is strong. I can give you strong children. Just let me in." John did not speak for a moment. He was still thinking if this was real or some dream left behind from the war. The woman looked strong, but she was shaking, and her breath was heavy, like she had run for days. He saw cuts on her arms and smoke rising from her back, like something had burned. Her Rusty growled again, but did not attack. John lowered his tool and moved aside and let her in. She stepped in slowly, like she had never been inside a human home before. She looked at the lights and the soft floor and the machine that made warm air, and her eyes showed a flicker of wonder. Then her legs gave out and she collapsed near the wall and whispered something in her alien tongue. John brought water and a clean blanket. He did not ask her questions yet. He knew the look of someone running from death. And she was not just running, she was hunted. That night John did not sleep. He sat in his chair with Rusty by his feet and kept watching the strange woman on his floor. She slept like someone who had not closed her eyes for weeks. Sometimes she spoke in dreams, sometimes she cried without tears, and once she whispered his name, even though he never told it to her. When morning came, John checked her armor. It was strange metal, not from Earth. But what made his heart stop was the weapon she had hidden. It was sharp and glowing and full of power, a warrior's weapon. She had not come here by mistake. She woke up just as he was holding the weapon, and her eyes went wide with alarm. But she did not attack. She just said, "Please, please listen. I am not here to fight. I am here because I have no other choice. My people are dying. We were strong once. We ruled stars and moons, but we fought something we could not defeat, and now we are almost gone. They said humans are strong, stronger than they look, stronger than they know. We need that strength, not for war, for survival. You are our last chance." She reached for the weapon but stopped halfway. John put it down on the table and said nothing. He still did not trust her, but in her voice there was no lie, just fear and maybe hope. He gave her food. She ate like someone who forgot the taste of peace. Then she sat near the window and watched the sky. She said, "Others will come, not like her, not kind. They will not knock on your door. They will break it." John looked at the stars. Something was coming. He could feel it in the air. He had left the war, but maybe the war had not left him. And the woman, she had come not for love, not for safety, but for something older than both, for survival, for bloodline, for a future. Wind outside was louder now. The stars seemed closer, and the silence was no longer safe. The sky above the human colony was quiet, but the air was not calm, and the wind carried whispers of something waiting in the dark beyond the hills. John stood outside his metal cabin, watching the stars blink and fade while Rusty walked in slow circles near his boots, with ears twitching to every sound inside the cabin. The strange alien woman was awake, now sitting beside the warm generator, With a blanket around her shoulders and her long hair falling over one eye like shadow, she was not resting. She was listening, watching, thinking. John entered without a word and placed a warm metal mug near her feet, and she looked up at him with tired eyes that still held the fire of something unbroken. He asked for her name, but she gave a sound he could not pronounce, and then she smiled and said, "Call me Rila." She said it slowly, as if learning how to speak the word herself. John sat down and waited. Rila touched the metal table with one hand and traced symbols in the dust that meant nothing to him but carried weight in her eyes. She said, "I was trained to fight since childhood, trained to lead armies, trained to conquer worlds, but none of that matters now because my world is broken and my army is gone, and I am alone." John asked why she came to him. Why this place? Why that door? Hela looked at the floor and then at him and said, "I did not choose the door. The stars did. I followed a signal, a human signal. A map left by one of your own long ago. Your people visited our world before the war, before the darkness, and they left behind stories. Stories of a species that survives everything. You do not have claws or wings or fire, but you fight like no one else. You keep rising even when you fall. My leaders wanted to study you, but I wanted to understand you. I came to see if the stories were true." John leaned back and watched her. She did not sound like a spy. She sounded like someone who had lost everything, but still carried hope in both hands. Rila stood and walked to the wall where her armor lay in pieces, and she touched the shoulder plate with a kind of sadness. She said, "We thought we were gods, but then came the darkness. It took our cities, it took our oceans, it took our children, so our leaders made a plan: find the humans, breed with the strong ones, create something new, something that can live when we are all gone." John did not speak because he could feel the truth in her voice like cold metal against skin. But something was not right. Something was hiding behind her words. That night, while Rila slept again, John took her armor and found a hidden slot under the chest plate. Inside it was a thin silver device. When he pressed it, a small hologram appeared. It showed a council of tall figures in dark robes speaking in the language he did not understand, but Rila's voice came in a whisper from the memory. "They will not accept me. They will call me traitor, but I have seen the humans. I have seen what they become under pressure. I believe they are the answer." John turned off the device and looked at Rila sleeping beside the fire. She had risked her life and betrayed her own kind to come here, not just to survive, but to save something deeper than herself. Suddenly Rusty barked and ran to the door, and the lights flickered twice before the power cut for one full second. In that second, John saw a shape pass by the window. Not human, not friendly. He grabbed the plasma tool and woke Rila, who jumped up and reached for her broken blade, but stopped when John pointed to the window. She whispered one word: "Hunters." John moved to the corner and peeked through the cracks. He saw two tall shadows moving like smoke between trees. They were not like Rila. Their armor was darker, and they carried long staffs with glowing tips. They were scanning the air. Hela said, "They are here for me. My people sent them to erase me because I carry secrets. Because I chose you." John asked what they will do if they find her. She said, "They will burn everything. You, me, this place." John looked around at his cabin, at the tools, at the small garden outside, at Rusty still growling low. He had left the war to escape this kind of life, but now it had found him again. And this time it was not just about nations or politics. It was about survival. It was about future. Hela placed her hand on his shoulder and said, "I am ready to run if you tell me. But I will not run alone again." John looked into her eyes. He saw fear, but he also saw fire. He said, "If they want to fight, they will get one. And this time the human will be ready." The morning sky turned gray as thick clouds covered the sun, and the wind carried the smell of burned leaves and strange metal, and something else, something older and darker. John stood outside his cabin with a scanner in one hand and his old plasma tool in the other, while Rila stayed low behind the generator, watching every tree, every shadow, every whisper. The ground trembled for a second, and then silence returned. But it was not the silence of peace. It was the silence before something terrible. Lurhala spoke without looking up and said, They are not like me, they are not warriors. They are hunters trained to erase mistakes, trained to erase. Me. John asked what kind of mistake she was, and she answered, I believed in you, I believed in your kind, and now they want me gone. He looked at her armor and her scars, and thought maybe belief comes with a price, and maybe the ones who carry truth always bleed first. The wind pushed the door open, and Rusty barked once and then growled at nothing. John stepped out with slow, careful feet and walked toward the old Combs Tower at the edge of the colony, and every step felt like walking through glass. He climbed the metal stairs and reached the top where the air was sharper and colder, and the world looked smaller. He turned on the scope and searched the horizon, and there he saw them, two shadows moving fast between the broken fence and the rocks near the dry river. Not human, not machines, not animals, tall, silent, precise. He called Rila on the old radio and said, they are close, maybe a minute away, maybe less, and she replied, then this place will not stand. John climbed down and met her at the cabin door, where she handed him a small device and said, press this. When you must, it will blind them for 10 seconds. He asked, what about the rest of the time? And she said, that part is yours. The hunters came without sound. No engines, no roars, just fast steps and a strange humming that made the walls shake and the power flicker. John stood near the entrance with the plasma tool humming in his hand while Rila disappeared into the shadows near the garden. Then the door broke open like paper, and the first hunter entered. Its face was covered in metal. Its eyes glowed red. Its weapon was long and sharp and alive. It moved like wind and metal mixed together. John fired the plasma tool, but the hunter dodged and struck the wall, and everything shook like thunder. Rusty jumped and bit the leg of the hunter, and sparks flew, but the hunter kicked him. Across the room, John pressed the small device. A burst of white light filled the room, and the hunter froze for 10 seconds. That was enough. Rila leapt from behind and slammed a blade into the neck of the hunter, and blue sparks exploded as the creature collapsed in silence. But there was another one, stronger, faster, angrier. It came through the back and caught Rila before she could turn. It lifted her and slammed her into the ground and raised its glowing spear to end her. But John charged and smashed the plasma tool against its back, and the machine hissed and turned toward him. It swung its weapon and hit John's shoulder, and fire ran through his bones, but he did not fall. He grabbed a sharp piece of metal from the floor and stabbed it into the hunter's side. It roared louder than wind, louder than Warhella, rose with blood on her face and fire in her eyes, and kicked the hunter's leg and broke something inside it. Then she pulled her old blade, and with one scream she drove it through the chest of the enemy. The room turned quiet again, but this silence was heavy, heavy with pain, heavy with truth. John fell to one knee, and Rila rushed to him and held his arm and said, you are stronger than I thought. He said, not strong, just stubborn. She laughed with blood on her lips and pain in her voice, and said, maybe that is better. They buried the bodies near the dry river with stones and fire, not because they cared, but because some things should not be left for the night to find. Rila sat near the fire later that evening and told John about the hunters. They are bred for one thing, to erase, to clean what the leaders call errors, and now that they know I am here, more will come. John looked at the stars and said, then we do not wait. We do not hide, we prepare. She touched the scars on her arm and said, I never thought I would fight beside a human. John smiled and said, I never thought I would fight again, but maybe this time we fight for something that matters and far beyond the hills. Another signal blinked. Another shadow moved, and another enemy began its journey toward them. The night was quiet again, but the silence no longer brought peace. It carried weight, it carried questions, it carried fear. John sat inside the cabin, with his arm bandaged and his eyes fixed on the broken hunter's spear, now resting beside the fire. Like a fallen god's tooth, Rila stood near the wall holding a small glowing cube that pulsed like a heart, and inside it data moved like flowing light. She said, this is all that is left of my research, my mission, my betrayal, and now it belongs to you. John asked what it is, and she answered, it is proof. Proof that your kind can change everything. Proof that our future may still exist. proof that life does not end with war. She touched the cube, and a soft light rose between them. It showed shapes and lines and numbers, but it also showed something else, something deeper, something alive. The image of human cells next to alien cells side by side. Then slowly merging, not forced, not broken, but becoming one. John watched in silence. His breath slowed, his heart beat louder. He understood what she meant now. Not just alliance, not just protection, but creation. A new beginning. Grilla spoke softly, like someone afraid of her own words. My species is dying. Our genetics are collapsing. Centuries of forced evolution have made us powerful but also unstable. We are strong, but we cannot grow. We fight, but we do not heal. She looked at John and said, you are different. You are not the strongest, not the fastest, but you adapt, you survive, you endure. Even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. The cube shifted and showed another image, a child, not human, not alien. Something in between. Its heartbeat echoed through the room like a forgotten song. John felt his skin grow cold. He asked if it was real. Rila nodded and said, it is a simulation, but the science is true. You and I can create life that holds the strength of two worlds. He stepped back and stared at her. Why me? Why this place? Why Norhella lowered her eyes and said, because I watched you, not just now, from space, from orbit. Your signal was active. You talked to no one. You helped no one. But you grew food, you fixed machines, you played with your dog. You lived alone, but alive. You did not break. Not like so many others. John walked to the window and looked outside. The stars blinked, the wind moved the grass. And somewhere far away something screamed in the distance. He said, and now I am your experiment, your test subject. Thrila replied, no, you are my chance, maybe our last. Suddenly, the cube flashed red, and Rila grabbed it and spoke quickly in her language. Her voice was sharp, urgent. Her hands moved fast over the surface of the cube. The images changed. The signal, she whispered, they found it. The council knows I activated the gene map. They will come. Not hunters this time. Commanders. John asked how long they have. She answered, maybe 3 days, maybe less. They will not talk. They will not ask. They will erase. John walked over to his tools and picked up his old communication chip. He placed it on the table and said, if we send this, Earth will hear. Maybe they send help. Maybe they send fire, but they will come. Urhula said, if Earth comes, this becomes a war, not a rescue. Are you ready for that? John looked at the broken floor, at the blood still staining the corner, at Rusty sleeping with one eye open, and he said, I do not know what ready feels like anymore, but I will not run. Not again. Rila stepped closer. She held his hand. Her fingers were colder than his, but stronger. She placed his hand on the cube and said, then we begin. The rest of the night was work, quiet, precise, desperate. They took apart old machines and connected them to Rila's tech. They opened the old lab under the outpost. A place John had not entered since he arrived. A place filled with dust and broken hopes. They brought the simulation online. Scanned blood, matched sequences, watched new patterns form. In real time, no errors, no failure, just life growing. Gryla smiled once, a real smile. Not a warrior's grin, not a stranger's mask. Just a woman who saw light where once there was only ash. John sat across from her. As the sun began to rise, he said, what do we call it? This new thing, this new being. She looked at him and whispered, hope. Outside the wind stopped. The sky turned golden, and high above them, in orbit, a black ship opened its wings. The sky cracked with thunder without rain as the black ship hovered above the valley like a silent god watching from the clouds, with eyes that never blink. John stood at the edge of the outpost with his hand on the scanner and his other hand holding the link connected to the old Earth beacon. Beside him, Rila stared at the ship with a face carved from stone, but her eyes betrayed something older than fear. She said, this is not a scout, this is a judgment. The ship made no sound, but the ground beneath them trembled like something ancient had awakened and remembered what it had once been. Rusty barked at the sky, then backed away with tail low and ears flat. John did not move. He had seen machines like this before during the early years of the war, but this was cleaner, colder, more Precise, a beam of blue light descended from the belly of the ship and formed a circle in front of the cabin, and then a figure appeared inside it. It was tall, not like the hunters. Its armor was smooth, its face hidden behind glass. It carried no weapon. But power clung to it like a shadow. Hela whispered the name of the one who now stood before them, Commander Bear. She said, "He is not here to kill, not yet. He is here to offer the final choice." John stepped forward and asked why they had come. The figure spoke in perfect Earth English with a voice that sounded like three voices speaking at once. "Give her to us, and we will spare your land. Give her to us, and we will erase her without pain. Give her to us, and you may live and watch your stars in peace." Hela stood tall and said, "I came here to live, not to die. I came to build, not to destroy. I chose the human because he sees what your eyes refuse to see. He is not my prison. He is my partner." Bear did not turn to her. He looked only at John and said, "She is broken. She carries unstable code. Her presence here is an infection. You can cure it with one choice." John looked at Hela, then at the ship, then at the land he had planted, the machines he had fixed, the sky he had learned to trust. He said, "She stays." The air changed, the ship made no move, but the blue beam darkened, and Bear spoke again. "Then you are marked. Your outpost is no longer neutral. Your species will not be contacted again. You have chosen corruption over order." Hela stepped beside John and said, "We have chosen life over fear." The beam vanished. Bear vanished. The sky went still. But they knew the silence was not peace. It was the sound of something building, something cold, something final. John and Hela returned inside and sealed the doors. They activated every shield system, every old weapon, every backup core. They had 3 hours, maybe less, before the sky burned inside. The lab, the simulation still ran, the code still formed, the cells still danced. Hela placed her hand on the glass of the chamber and said, "If they destroy this, they destroy our only chance." John nodded and said, "Then we protect it with everything." Later a new signal came, not from orbit, from the mountain ridge. Another figure walked toward the outpost alone. It was not a hunter. It wore the same armor as Hela, but darker, heavier. It was her own blood. Hela stepped outside and faced the figure under the burning sky. She called the name Sivan. Figure removed the helmet and revealed a face like hers, but sharper, colder. "Sivan said, you were always weak, sister. You believed in stories. You believed in them. Now they will watch you." Dear Hela said, "I believe in what I have seen. I have seen kindness without reward. I have seen loyalty without command. I have seen a future that you will never understand." Sivan raised a blade and said, "Then die with your belief." John fired the turret, and a wall of fire rose between them. Hela pulled John back and shouted, "We cannot kill him. He is not just family. He is the key." John asked the key to what she said, to the override, the signal that can stop the ship above. He carries it in his armor. They planned fast, moved faster. Hela fought her brother hand to hand while John circled behind toward the ridge transmitter. Sivan was stronger, but Hela knew him. She knew how he breathed, how he hesitated, how he lied. She broke his stance, took the chip, signaled John. The sky opened. The ship responded, then paused for 10 seconds. Nothing moved, and then it turned slowly, silently, and left the sky. Hela fell beside her brother and whispered, "I do not hate you. I pity you." John carried her back inside as the stars returned. But nothing was the same. The morning sun rose behind clouds, shaped like forgotten creatures, and the land felt heavy, as if the sky had leaned down to listen to the whispers of those who had survived the night. John walked along the edge of the damaged fence with his fingers brushing against metal and ash, while Rusty followed close behind with silent steps and wide eyes. Inside the cabin, the lab lights blinked without rhythm, and the simulation cube pulsed like a living heart, trapped inside a cage of wires and numbers. Hela stood near the generator, with her arms crossed and her jaw set like a blade. Her wounds were bandaged but not healed, and her mind carried more pain than her skin ever could. They had survived the night, but survival was not victory. Not yet. John placed a broken panel on the table and said, "They will return. Not with warning, not with choices. Next time it will be fire. Rila nodded and replied, then we must move first. We must make them blind. We must make them bleed. She walked to the console and opened the interface to the black ship's signal system. The override key they stole from Sci-Fi now pulsed with unstable energy. It was enough to breach the outer defense, but not to destroy it. Not alone. John asked what they needed. Rila looked at him and said something. Only humans have imagination. The plan was not clean, it was not perfect, but it was human. Use the override to confuse their sensors. Feed false coordinates into their navigation. Guide their orbit into a false drop zone. Draw them away from the simulation. Then strike the power core from inside her. Hila said the ship is not a weapon. It is a brain, a flying mind. Cut the thought. The body falls. They only had hours before the ship returned with new commands and deadlier orders. So they began. John opened the old satellite uplink on the ridge where cold winds cut like knives. Rila modified the override key using her own blood as biometric code. She said this is the only way to fool them. Only a traitor can make a traitor's lie. John remembered the war. He remembered broken plans, broken people, but this was different. This time the fight was not for flags, not for orders. This time it was for life. Real new, unseen. As night returned, so did the ship. No words, no warnings, just a beam of light across the valley like the eye of a silent god watching its failed creations. John climbed the tower. Rila entered the canyon where the energy veins of the land met the sky's memory. Together, they activated the signal. At first nothing happened. Then the ship shifted. It turned slightly, hesitated, slowed, looked confused inside the cabin. Rusty barked once, then silence again. Rila sent the virus. John triggered the pulse. A ripple of light danced through the clouds. The ship began to descend. Not fast, not straight, but with a strange trembling like a thought breaking into pieces. John shouted into the radio. Norhela charged through the rocks, jumped across the burning path, reached the access port, hidden beneath the ridge. Her hands burned as she forced the key inside the slot. The ship screamed, not loud but deep, the kind of scream only machines make when they remember they were never alive. Valley lit up, a wave of light, then dark, then nothing. Silence. Then the ship dropped out like a fall, like a surrender. John ran down the hill, his lungs burning, his heart pounding. Rila stood beside the wreck, her arms shaking, her eyes full. He reached her and held her. No words, just breath, just warmth. They had done it. Not by being stronger, but by being unpredictable, by being human. Later they walked through the remains of the black ship. No bodies, only circuits, only memories, only warnings. They found the core. Still warm, still humming. Grayla placed her hand on it and said, they will send more. Stronger, smarter, and they will come faster. John looked at the broken sky and said, then we build faster. We think smarter. We become more. She smiled, not like before. This was different. This was real. That night they returned to the cabin. Rusty slept without growling. The simulation ran smoothly. The child inside the code now complete, now ready. John held the cube and whispered one word. Soon above them the stars watched. But they were not alone anymore. Something new had begun. The sky above the valley was clear for the first time in weeks, and the stars blinked like old friends returning from far places, and the wind no longer carried the weight of fear. John stood outside the cabin with his hands covered in soil and his shirt stained with oil and fire, while Rusty slept beneath the shade of the old antenna that once called for help, but now only listened. The land around them had changed. Burned trees now showed green at the roots. The broken fence now held new lights powered by alien cells. The silence was still there, but it no longer meant danger. Now it meant something else. It meant waiting inside the cabin. The lab was warm and filled with soft light from the simulation chamber, where something beautiful had begun to grow. Rila sat beside the chamber with her hand resting on the glass and her other hand placed over her stomach, where a second heartbeat now lived. She breathed slowly and deeply, each breath filled with memories of war and flight and betrayal. Each breath filled with something she had never allowed herself before. Hope John entered with quiet steps. He placed a small metal box on the table and opened it to reveal the first communication device built from human and alien tech fused together without conflict. He said, "The signal is ready. Earth will hear it." Not as a call for help, but as an invitation. Rayla looked at him and asked, "Do you think they will come?" He smiled and said, "I think curiosity is our oldest instinct. They will come, some with kindness, some with fear, but they will come." She nodded and said, "Then we must be ready, not with weapons, but with welcome." She stood and walked to the window, where the sky stretched wide and endless. She placed her hand on her stomach and closed her eyes. The child moved, not much, but enough. "This is the new blood," she said. "Not just ours, not just yours, but both and more." John looked at the land. He saw the future, not in visions, but in work, in tools, in seeds and circuits, in small hands that had not yet touched the world. They named the child before birth. Not from Earth, not from her world, but from the stars. A name that meant bridge. A name that meant beginning. Weeks passed. Then months. No ships came. No warnings. Only quiet growth. The plants grew faster. The machines learned quicker. Even Rusty seemed younger. Rila trained every morning. Not like a soldier, but like a guardian. She taught John how to see wind before it moved. How to hear footsteps before they touched ground. How to speak without sound. John taught her how to plant during cold, how to repair with wire and glue, how to find strength in silence. Child grew inside her with balance and fire, its heartbeat stronger each week, its energy touching every machine, even the simulation. Cube began to pulse in rhythm with the life it once predicted. Then one evening, as red light covered the horizon, a new signal appeared. Not from Earth, not from her people, from somewhere unknown. Not a threat, not a warning, just a tone, a single note. Held steady, held long. John decoded it slowly, word by word. It said, "We see you, we hear you, we are learning." Grayla said, "This is how peace begins." Not with agreement, with understanding. That night they sat beside the fire outside the cabin. Rusty lay near their feet. The stars blinked above like stories waiting to be told. The land was quiet, but full. Rella whispered, "This child will never know what it means to kneel. This child will walk on two worlds and belong to both and protect all." John said, "This child will ask questions no one has answered and build things no one has seen." They did not sleep that night. They watched the stars move slowly. They listened to the wind speak softly. They held each other not as strangers, not as warriors, but as builders of something that had no name yet. When morning came, it brought new clouds and new light. Rila walked outside with her hands still resting over her child. She looked at the hill where they buried the past. She looked at the sky where they found the future. She said, "I was born to fight. I was trained to destroy. But now I carry creation." John stood beside her and said, "I was born human. Now I feel more." The wind moved around them. The plants bent toward the light. The machines hummed a soft note, and high above, in a place beyond planets, 1,000 eyes opened, not to judge, not to conquer, but to learn. The story had just begun.